the tomb, the Turks and the local Arabs said, oh, this is a business for us. We're going to take money from the Jews who want to visit a holy site of Shimon HaTzadik. Anyhow, the two chief rabbis at the time in the late 19th century, around about 1880, 1885, 1875, the two chief rabbis, I'm not going to ask you who they were, it's difficult to know things like this, but the Ashkenazi chief rabbi was Rabbi Shmuel Salant, and the Sephardi chief rabbi, believe it or not, his name was Rav Avraham Ashkenazi. And those two rabbis decided to try and buy out this property. And they went to Gibraltar and other places. They raised, at that time, a large amount of money, which was 800 pounds. And they bought the 17 dunams, this 4+ acres of this property, and they created a religious trust, what's called in Hebrew a hekdesh. They created a hekdesh, and people lived here, very poor people, who could not live in the old city or who wanted to live in Jerusalem. And just below us, these buildings are the same buildings that you see. They were built like a train, like a long building. Each family lived in one room. No toilet, no kitchen, everything was external. And I personally met people who lived in these rooms. And I took one guy into the room and he said to me, I grew up sleeping on a windowsill, right, which was about this wide. Him and his brother used to sleep on the windowsill because there were 8 kids and they were living in one room. So when our kids say that the room's too small or they got to share a room with somebody, bring them to Shimon HaTzadik. Anyhow, but what happened was the Jews lived here, and in 1948, if you recall, we spoke about the fact that the Jordanians took over Eastern Jerusalem throughout the period of the end of the War of Independence, which ended around about February, April 1949, until the Six-Day War in 1967. And the Jordanians took over this neighborhood and an adjacent neighborhood in that direction called Nachalat Shimon, and a third one called Nachalat Yitzchak. These 3 neighborhoods were taken over by the by the Jordanians, and together with our great friends in the United Nations, they put in Arab squatters into the Jewish properties. And so Arabs took over the buildings where Jews used to live. This was a Jewish neighborhood. You won't hear any Palestinian activists ever admitting that this was a Jewish neighborhood. In fact, it was never an Arab neighborhood until 1949, when they kicked the Jews out, expelled the Jews, and moved in Arabs. Now, just above here, just about 100 meters from here, you might recall the famous story of the convoy of nurses and doctors and patients that was attacked in the beginning of 1948 by terrorists, and unfortunately 78 nurses, doctors and patients, Jewish ones, were murdered on the road up to Har HaZeitim, right above this structure. And there's a black monument there. We didn't drive past it, but it's right up here. So the Jews that were living in here understood that their lives were in danger. The British came to them and said to them, we cannot, brackets, will not protect you, right? And the Jews were either expelled or fled in fear of the Arab terrorists. This happened in 1948. So all these houses emptied out, and then in 1967, the Arabs continued to live in this property, and nothing was done about it. So from heavens, when this guy from the yeshiva came to me in 1998 approximately, and said, I found Shimon HaTzadik, and they got their animals in the shul, and I spoke to Rabbeni, we started a process. And that process ended in 2003 when we acquired. There were people actually from Montreal, from New York, and from Israel, and from Toronto. We put together a group, and that group purchased this whole property over here.
From whom?
From
the Arabs?
No, not from them.
No, it's
From the
your
Jewish
property.
Religious Trust. From the Hekdesh. There were 2 Hekdeshes. There was an Ashkenazi Hekdesh and a Sephardi Hekdesh. Now normally a hekdesh, which is a trust, will not sell because it's a trust. But Rav Eliashiv, who was a great Ashkenazi rabbi, at the time ruled that because Arabs have taken over the land of the trust, the Jews can buy it and use it and populate it. That's the only way to save the land that's owned by the trust. So we actually bought the property from the Sephardian Ashkenazi Trust, and a company was set up by actually one of our investors from Toronto, was a big real estate guy. And till today, that company exists. And even though it's a long time, I'm not involved with it day to day, but they're still trying to get building rights to build 250 units in this area. So when the deal was signed, the first thing we did, we said, when you do land reclamation, if you don't possess it, the Arabs will just take over it again. So the night that we signed the contract and got permission from the Hekdesh to move into the property, I got a bunch of guys from the yeshiva from Bedorot to come and sleep in this building. Now this building existed, but you can see here, this is new stone. This didn't exist. It was broken, and where the Arona Kodesh is, this is now a yeshiva and a synagogue. And by the way, this synagogue has existed for more than 100 years, and it's this synagogue where the previous chief rabbi of Israel, Rav Ovadia Yosef, had his bar mitzvah. So the building was broken down, the Arab moved out, we moved in, the yeshiva bochrim. And I want to tell you one story. So that night they're sleeping here, and they go to Rabbi Benny Elon, and they said, Rabbi Benny, we're here, but we got no electricity, and we need some light, and whatever. So Rabbi Benny says, I'll go to the neighbors, and I'll ask the neighbors. Maybe maybe I'll take an extension cord, and maybe they'll give us some electricity. No, you're crazy. The neighbors, we've just taken over their property. Rabbi Benny was an optimist. So he takes the extension cord and he knocks on a door over there, and the Arab's still living there right now. He knocks on the door and he says in Hebrew to the guy, do you mind if we plug in my extension cord so we can give some light to the guys in the building? The Arab looks at him and he says the following sentence in Hebrew, which I will translate to English for those who don't understand. He looks at Rabbeinu and he says to him like this: Tamid yadati shehatzadik Shimon yachzor. Wow. He says, I always knew that Shimon HaTzadik would come back.
What did the Arabs call this neighborhood?
Sheikh Jarrah. They still called it Sheikh Jarrah because they wanted to belong it for two reasons. They wanted to take away the Jewish, just like Jerusalem was called by the Romans what? a.k.a. right? They want to take away the Jewish name. By the way, the term Shem, what is Shem's English name?
Nablus.
Nablus. So where does the word Nablus come from?
Neapolis.
Neapolis, right? The Arabs just can't say the letter P, so from Neapolis it became Nablus. Ela Capitalina, they also changed the Yerushalayim to Ela Capitalina to take away the Jewish name. But here also, the Arabs don't want to admit it's Shimon HaTzadik. There was nothing here. We have aerial photographs. In fact, I might have it here. I'll show you aerial photographs of this area in 1931, where all there was here was the homes of the Jewish homes and the tomb, and Sheikh Jarrah is over there. So the Arab acknowledged that it is Jewish-owned property. I'm happy to say we moved in about 15 Jewish families. We passed one of their homes on the way up here. There's a kollel over here of guys learning every day, and there's a Jewish presence that has come back to this neighborhood. And the fact that we could walk in to the tomb and all these guys are hanging out there and learning and davening, it's thanks to the fact that we repurchased and we actually brought the police in to protect the area, and now people walk here as if it's a normal, natural thing. And believe me, I get a lot of nachas when I see it.
Job well done.
In addition to Shimon HaTzadik, on the other side of the road, we don't have time to go there and the bus can't come in, but there's an area called Nachalat Shimon, which we are in the process of reclaiming also. If anybody's interested in land reclamation, investments, approach me afterwards. And we're trying to buy up properties in that neighborhood, which is right next to the light rail system on that side of Shimon HaTzadik. It's called Nachalat Shimon. And our big problem there is that we are competing against Arabs, because Arabs found out about those properties and they are approaching the Jewish owners, also some of them using Jewish lawyers, and going and offering them more money and buying up the Jewish properties that they used to own, their great-grandparents owned 100 years ago, and taking it away from the Jews. Baruch Hashem, this one we bought and they cannot buy. But in Nachalat Shimon there were many, many different properties and they're buying them up. So we're trying very hard to prevent that from happening. So that's what we call Geulat Karkaot, or land reclamation or land redemption. So that's the story of modern Shimon HaTzadik. Just the last thing before we go to the bus, I mentioned that this is an old building, even though it's been redone. But if you look up to the top there, you can see two things. You can see, first of all, a Magen David at the entrance to show that this was a synagogue. And you can see on top of it there's some Hebrew writing. And believe it or not, that Hebrew writing is a donor's plaque. Right? And it says there, Kadosh La, and it's talking about a person who donated the money and for the shul and their memory, and in the end it says Tieh Nishmato Surah B'Tzorah Chaim Tantzaba, which you see often on top of tombs, of graves, and it's written here also. It's a donor plaque in memory of somebody that passed away that was donated over 100 years ago to this building.
So according to the area, is it known as Sheikh Jarrah or as Shimon HaTzadik?
Unfortunately, it's known as Sheikh Jarrah, and I am fighting in the area to change that name. But they said this whole neighborhood is known as Sheikh Jarrah, and it's an ongoing battle.
What is Abu Bakr HaTzadik stands for?
That's the name of the street. And we're trying to change that. This is the street name, not the building name. But
why HaTzadik?
Why not HaTzadik?
Because it could be named after the Jewish tzaddik. I don't know, Abu Bakr, maybe that's Shimon HaTzadik.
I was
I
going
don't
to say
know.
it's probably
But anyhow, that's